Greetings and welcome to my new calculus channel. So in the previous video I discussed the derivation of the extended line and the circle. And so in this video I'm going to talk about some of the preliminaries that we need to define or to derive the rest of the requirements, in particular right angles. So let's begin. Now, as you saw, just a quick recap, we defined primitive location. It's the where concept, and we said let it be defined in terms of here, which is where we are, or not here. And then we defined motion, which is the change in position from here to not here, or vice versa. And we also defined direction primitively as the motion in what we see remains unchanged, or if it changes, then it leads to a much longer path between here and not here. Okay, so the shortest distance between here and not here is that motion which what we see remains unchanged even in the very least. Okay, and then I showed you also how to derive the circle, and the circle was derived as that object, that geometric object from which any location on the path to the center has the same straight line, and that if that straight line is extended to meet the circle, again it must meet it, otherwise it's not a proper circle, then that object, that geometric object, is a circle. And so now, to continue with the next requirement, which is that all right angles are equal, we have to define objects. So an angle is formed at the intersection of two lines, okay? And we'll call the intersection of any two lines a vertex. And obviously four angles are formed when two lines intersect each other, right? So we'll just call those objects angles. And how are we going to define an angle? Well, this is how we are going to define an angle. We're going to say that the vertex must coincide with the center of any circle, and it's very important that we use a circle because the circle was the previous object that we derived from nothing, from the previous two, right? And one of the lines must coincide with a diameter. It's very easy to see that one straight line from one part of the circle to the other is a diameter, and that they're all equal because of the symmetry of the circle, okay? That's very important. The circle has symmetry. What does symmetry mean? It means the same measure, okay? That's what that Greek word means. It means having the same measure. So the diameter is just a line segment through the circle center whose endpoints lie on the circle path. And then, of course, we can have a ratio of magnitudes. And what that means is it's literally the comparison of the distance of any two given distances or any two given magnitudes. And since we are dealing with line segments, it's appropriate to talk about A, B, and C, D being distances, where A and B are the names of the points, okay? So we'll say, we'll note here now that we don't yet have numbers. So we're not going to talk about ratios of anything but magnitudes, okay? Now, what is an arc? So we have to define arc too, and we'll say an arc is any distance portion or length portion of the circle path on the periphery, okay? So this, any particular arc like this is a distance, right? And we'll call the measure of an angle, we'll say that the measure of an angle is defined as a ratio of magnitudes where the antecedent is the length of the circle arc, in other words, the length of this red arc, subtended by the angle. The antecedent is just the first part of the ratio and the consequent the second part. And so we'll call that the measure of an angle, okay? And obviously the consequent will be the radius length, which we don't care about right now because we don't have numbers. It's just part of a ratio of magnitudes. So a right angle is realized by observing that 4 equal arcs correspond to 4 angles. Okay, so you can first, well, you might say, well, how do you divide it up? Well, any diameter, before we go any further, any diameter will divide the circle into 2 separate arcs, which we call semicircles, right? And it's pretty obvious that there is another diameter or another radius which will divide those semicircles into equal parts too. In other words, we have 4 equal parts, 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is all possible because of the property of symmetry, all right? In other words, 2 equal paths or parts are divided by the property of symmetry, and we know that any diameter subtends an arc that is half the circumference, okay? In other words, it doesn't matter what diameter you draw, the circumference it's subtended on is half I'm sorry, let me repeat that. The part of the circumference is a semicircle, and it's subtended on a semicircle. So we don't need to do a compass and straight edge construction, but that's one way of seeing that it's possible. But we do know it by the property of symmetry. So now we can call a bisector line a perpendicular to the diameter because it forms 2 right angles whose vertices are at the center. Okay, so in other words, if we have 4 equal arcs like this, is there any other diameter that will cut this diameter so that the arcs are equal? The answer is no, there isn't any other diameter. Okay, otherwise the arcs are not going to be equal, right? So if we had, let's go to this applet, if we had a diameter going like that, crossing this one here, the arc lengths would not be equal. So whatever that is, that diameter can be called, it's not going to be called a perpendicular because we're going to call this vertical perpendicular, this vertical diameter a perpendicular if and only if the way it intersects this diameter is such that the arcs are equal by symmetry. So now we have a perpendicular, and we can move on to the next section, or the next property that we need, which is a transversal line. Okay, and it's basically just a line that intersects 2 other lines, as you see in this diagram here. Okay, so and after this part now, we are ready to define parallel lines. Parallel lines are chords or lines that are subtended on equal arcs between the chord and diameter. So for example, look at this diagram. So this diameter is parallel to this chord, right? Because they're subtended on equal arcs, the blue arcs. So we can now, using this established fact that the diameters are perpendicular and their point of intersection is a circle center, so that we can say that the rest of the different types of angles can be defined. For example, co-interior angles, alternate angles, and we basically define parallel lines, and we can also define now right angles. Okay, so we define co-interior angles as you see here and alternate angles. You can read this in my free ebook. It's very well defined. And now the next, so now we've defined parallel lines and right angles, okay, because the right angles are just simply those angles formed when the diameters cut each other in such a way that all the arcs are equal. All right, so we're done with that. Now we need to do some preparation for the 5th and last requirement. So I think this is a good time to stop, and we'll come back to this when we complete the fifth requirement. So what I want to say now is that I have derived all 4 of the requirements for you from nothing. I didn't need any axioms or postulates or any beliefs. This is all straightforward and very easy to do. And you can study all these facts in my free ebook, to which there'll be a link in the details section, and you can download it. Now, if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. Please spread the news of this channel, because the mainstream academics that are my enemies will do their utmost best to destroy all of this information. They've tried several times to close my YouTube channel. They've already succeeded 6 times in having my account removed from my new calculus site. And there are constantly sites springing up about me, calling me crank, libeling me, trying to discredit me by saying that I have mental diseases, that I'm a psychopath, that I'm a narcissist. And of course, if you believe any of that, you're an absolute idiot. Because so far I've gained 0 in terms of any benefit. I don't get a single cent from producing these videos. And I'm doing it as an act of love to the future generation. So anyway, click like. Remember to click like, because there are certain people who come to my channel, don't even watch the videos, just simply, their job is just simply to vote them down. Okay, so click like and become a subscriber and spread the news. I am the great John Gabriel, the discoverer of the first and only rigorous formulation of calculus, which you can read about in my free ebook, and which also exposes many of the flaws and ignorant ideas in the mainstream. So, join me again for the next episode, which I hope to produce soon. And that's the completion of the 5th requirement. My name is John Gabriel. This is the New Calculus channel. Until next time, goodbye.